Barrister.
The chairman of PATA Nepal chapter, my good friend Bipuri Chand Thakkar, Excellencies, guests, and delegates. Namaste, Subha Prabhat. Sanchai Hunucha. All well? It's really an honor for me, and I'm deeply humbled to be here as a guest of PATA Nepal chapter, my very first visit for my wife and I in Nepal. And it's only been 48 hours, and we've discovered such a warm, hospitable, incredibly gifted country. So thank you very much, all of you, for your warm welcome to this wonderful country. And delighted to be addressing this summit gathering for the first time after COVID, the leaders and stakeholders of travel and tourism in Nepal, in the region, and even globally. I always say that tourism and aviation are the two sides of a banknote. And for all of you who have ever used a banknote, or are still using banknotes, you will know that a banknote is only valuable if it has two sides. Travel and tourism are interconnected. One thrives when the other thrives. And the sooner we all recognize this, the sooner we can have a more meaningful, respectful dialogue between those two sectors. Because we do need and depend on each other. We may not often recognize it, we certainly do not often say it, but that's a fact. We need each other. And the sooner we accept this, the sooner we can have a more meaningful dialogue where we can help each other do better. Now, enhanced air connectivity is vital for the sustainable growth of tourism anywhere and everywhere. But that's even more crucial, vital for remote destinations and landlocked destinations. This is not a matter of a wish, this is a requirement. And that's why, for me, it's important to recognize that neighbors of landlocked countries have a duty, have a responsibility to facilitate the air connectivity of landlocked states. This is a matter which I feel very strongly about, even more so since I arrived in Nepal, because this is something which I think even international organizations like ICAO should spend more time on to ensure that the neighbors of a landlocked state do what they have to do to ensure that the landlocked state has the ability to survive and thrive. I say this a very simple example. How many of you here are owners of land? Just show of hands. How many of you are owners of land? Show of hands. How many of you are owners of many lands? Well, I see a few hands. Okay. Now, if you buy a piece of land and you realize afterwards that your land is surrounded by other lands, and somehow the only way you can access your land is by helicopter or doing jumping across the fence. It doesn't work, right? There are laws to ensure that you have access to your land. You bought your land, you must have access. Same for a landlocked state. If you're surrounded by other territories, there must be ways where you have access to your land to be able to enjoy what we call peaceful enjoyment of your property. And as a matter of law, sovereignty extends across your boundaries horizontally, but also vertically. Your sovereignty extends into airspace, which means you have to have access to your airspace. And you can't magically appear in your airspace. Your flights will be coming from some other airspace into your airspace, which means there must be an agreed process, especially as all your neighbors are parties to international agreements which guarantee transit across airspace. The two transit agreements under the Chicago Convention. So I say this because this is a matter of vital importance for any country which seeks to develop itself, like most countries obviously want to. Now, if I can take you back to 2019, which we all know were the heyday of travel and tourism. The airline industry in 2019 was making a net profit of $26.4 billion US dollars. In December 2019, the forecast of IATA was that the global airline industry would produce a net profit of $29.3 billion US dollars, making it its 11th consecutive profitable year in 2020. Airlines were investing billions in next-generation aircraft and technology, in recruiting and training personnel to stimulate and meet the ever-increasing demand for air travel. Sky was literally not the limit in 2019, as long-term projections predicted a doubling in air travel over the next 2 decades. Then came COVID-19, which clipped the intertwined wings of travel and tourism. Now, with practically no flown revenues, but with massive debts and ongoing onerous financial commitments, even the well-run and financially healthy airlines could not survive without external financial support. The poorly run and financially challenged airlines, which were already destined to fail before COVID-19, clearly need all the help they can get, but they must first diligently reinvent themselves and reimagine the business model to survive in the most challenging new normal. They must also wake up to the opportunities and promises of the new normal. Just think about it. Virtual meetings and work from home are the new normal. But they also allow tourists the opportunity to work from hotels anywhere in the world, including in Nepal, so long as you have Wi-Fi. Tourism has long been characterized as discretionary or non-essential travel. But the inability to travel for so long during COVID, the resulting savings, which we all made from not traveling, and the greater focus on mindfulness, on quality of life, on health, on the ability to live now, not tomorrow, but now. All these have amplified people's need to travel, especially to places like Nepal, with its incredible vibes and unique attractions, history, and, I mean, after all, you've had 3 Lord Buddhas who hailed from Nepal. That is the most compelling story to start with. If the Lord Buddhas chose Nepal, why shouldn't the mere mortal tourists do so? So you've got unique opportunities here and challenges. But this is the time, and I must very strongly, this is the time for new mindsets, to find new solutions for the new normal. Because communities have already moved from having to accept what cannot be changed to changing what cannot be accepted. And that's why we need to understand that this is the time for reconnecting, rebuilding, and reinvigorating. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of priorities, I would like to suggest the following. First and foremost, safety. No tourists will travel if they feel a hint of lack of safety. You wouldn't travel if you had a hint of safety challenges. Your families would not allow you to travel. And you know increasingly how children are making decisions for families in terms of destinations. So safety must remain the number one priority. And the unfortunate fact that all airlines which are certified by the authorities of Nepal are banned from operating in Europe needs to be addressed and resolved as a matter of national interest with utmost urgency. All national, regional, and international stakeholders, including neighboring countries, ICAO, the EU, the World Bank, ADB, ACI, IATA, PATA, and all the well-wishers of Nepal must help the Nepalese authorities, 1, develop and implement a credible plan of action with clear and diligent deliverables. 2, secure both human and financial resources. And 3, set up an independent and respected safety oversight body to significantly improve national aviation safety. The environment must also be a priority. You heard it again from Sherpa in the video we just saw, how the cleanliness of the environment is not only a matter of concern for the gods, but is a matter of concern for humans. Now, it is true that aircraft, now this is interesting, aircraft were 70% more fuel efficient in 2007 than they were in 1967. And CO2 emissions per revenue ton kilometers were 67% lower in 2018 than they were in 1990. However, aviation's license to grow was incredibly challenged because overall airline emissions rose as the volume of air travel increased. By the end of 2019, aviation emissions were 70% higher than in 2005, and were expected to grow by 300% by 2050. It is also true that COVID caused global slashing of passenger flights and a consequential reduction in aviation's emissions. But it also led to an increasingly more demanding calls by communities for the public and private sectors and their leaders to be environmentally responsible. The aviation sector thus needs to credibly and diligently enhance its pre-COVID environmental commitments. Now, airlines reiterated before COVID-19 the industry's commitment to carbon neutral growth from the start of year 2021 with CORSIA, which is the offsetting program of ICAO, to cut net CO2 emissions to half the 2005 levels by 2050 and to explore pathways to zero net emissions by 2060, 2065. Now, carbon neutral growth means that the airline's carbon emissions are offset as they grow, whereas net zero emissions refer to achieving an overall balance between greenhouse gas emissions produced and greenhouse gas emissions taken out of the atmosphere. Now, clearly, COVID emboldened the calls for zero net emissions by 2050. So whereas before, the airlines were looking at ways to explore pathways to net emissions by 2060, 2065, the pressures after COVID were so strong that the airline industry had to rewrite its commitments. So in 2021, IATA AGM adopted a resolution for the global air transport industry to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. They propose to do it by eliminating the maximum of emissions at source, 65% through sustainable aviation fuels, 13% through new propulsion technology such as hydrogen, 3% through efficiency improvements, 11% through carbon capture and storage, and 8% through offsets. The ICAO Assembly of last year adopted a collective long-term global aspirational goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Again, it reinforced its CORSIA scheme. CORSIA stands for Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme, and adopted a new sectoral individual growth indicator for CORSIA from 2030 onwards. Now, offset sounds good in terms of the calculations and the way you're projecting the sector's, let's say, environmental credentials. You're basically trying to offset the harm you're doing. But let's be honest and recognize that many have criticized offsets as a means for companies to pay lip service to the need for environmental responsibility whilst avoiding any meaningful action on net emissions reductions. Greenpeace actually said, and I quote, "This whole strategy is a flight of fancy. Carbon offsetting is simply an excuse to carry on with business as usual while shifting the responsibility to cut emissions to someone else, somewhere else, at some other time. It's greenwash, pure and simple, and ministers should be wary of lending it any credibility." End of quote. In my books, offering to balance good and harm, to do less harm or even to do more good than harm, are clearly not as ethical and meaningful as committing to only do good. And not my friend Brian who would object to this. And it is my hope and prayer that all aviation stakeholders will put their minds, hearts, resources, regulatory schemes and incentives to help significantly reduce aviation's inherent emissions. Dear friends, allow me now to share a few thoughts on national airlines. Now, a well-run national airline is a vital link in the national value chain because of its demonstrable positive multiplier effect on the nation's socio-economic growth. Such a national airline is a nation's lifeline because it contributes to national socio-economic growth and provides its people with access to economic opportunities, food, healthcare, education, and the world. Its impact is felt even more strongly at times of crisis. It is, however, evident that a dysfunctional national airline cannot help itself, let alone its country. Hence my call for a complete rethink and a completely fresh look at national airlines which are not beyond redemption and transformation through an inclusive and sustainable new business model that benefits society. You see, the profit-only or even the profit-first mantra have left us with massive inequality, environmental challenges, and trustworthiness deficits, which impact negatively on planet, people, and ultimately even on profits. On the other hand, I put it to you that purpose-driven organizations and leaders adhering with credibility and trustworthiness, of course, to the highest standards of integrity, equity, inclusivity, and sustainability impact positively on planet, people, and ultimately on profits. I therefore propose here a new deal and a new purpose for national airlines with a paradigm shift from the traditional narrow focus on a few stakeholders who simply benefit from the national airline's profits to a wider focus on the many national stakeholders who benefit from the direct, indirect, multiplier, and catalytic effects of its operations. In the broadest terms, the new purpose of a national airline should be to contribute ethically and sustainably to national socio-economic development by providing safe, secure, strategic, cost-effective flights. Under the New Deal, the shareholders would set up a competent, honest, diverse, and respected board of directors, which will ensure that the national airline is effectively managed by competent, innovative, savvy, honest, and committed professionals who are focused on the sustained contribution of the airline to national socio-economic growth. We must indeed have the right people in the right positions doing the right things all the time. A country which genuinely and immediately embraces such a new national airline paradigm will give its reinvigorated national airline a fair chance to survive and thrive, thereby enabling the country to also take off. Let's take a minute to reflect on and be grateful for our blessings. And let's find ways to celebrate and leverage our blessings. Let's be honest about our failures and shortcomings. But let's not allow neither our blessings nor our challenges to prevent us from focusing on the need to be better every day. Beyond innovation and digitalization for a safe, secure, and seamless travel experience, there is an ever-growing need to create a more economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable travel and tourism sector that delivers inclusive benefits to local and regional communities and economies, and for which we can all be proud of. Let's make the travel and tourism sector an inclusive and impactful gift that keeps on giving by committing here and now to reconnecting, rebuilding, and revigorating it for good. Dhanabat. Thank you very much.